the shadow child's need to hide or deny. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the shadow of the child archetype, how it can show up in a life or business and purpose, and stop us growing when it wants to keep us small. It wants us to live in fear and denial, and to sometimes even not see the bigger picture, spiritually grow and spiritually awaken. So my name is Eileen. I'm a soul empowerment coach. I'm a healing therapist and a spiritual business strategist. And one of the things that, I love helping my clients with is to help them get more soul aligned and to really step more into their purpose. But one of the things we all know is that we can all get in our own way. And in many ways, it's our trauma, our inner child wounding, our limitations, our beliefs, our fears can stop us making huge breakthroughs in our business, in our life, and in our purpose. And in archetypes, there's lots of different archetypes, and I work with a lot of Jungian archetypes. And sometimes the Jungian archetypes are good to simplify things. And if we think about the support survival archetypes, there's certain archetypes that we tend to fall into in relation to fear, and they're the most common patterns that we all tend to jump into with certain challenges, and some of them are more obvious and more strong in us than others, and we're all very different. But in relation to the child archetypes and our child wounding, today I'm going to talk about aspects of the divine child, the innocent child, and the eternal child, and what can happen when the shadow overtakes those aspects in our life, and how it stops us from growing, and how it actually can stop us being able to face things and overcome our fears and have more power. Because the more that we are stuck in fear in our life, the more that we are in that kind of powerlessness, that from a child's perspective, you think about the divine child, there's purity, there's divinity in it. But when it's not in its divine form, that's very shadow and very limiting. And it's the same as the eternal child. The eternal child can help us tap into that eternal purity. And I suppose, there's children have this beautiful energy and freedom and sense of play and sense of a way at looking at the world that can be beautiful. But when you're stuck in your eternal child, for example, as a business, you have lots of problems because you're not grown up and you're not facing, you often don't take self-responsibility, and you can hide your head in the sand. And it's the same in any aspects of your life. When you only want to see positive things, or you want to be like a child and play at life, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble when you do not face reality, when you hide your head in the sand. And for example, if you're a healer, a therapist, or coach, and you have that attitude, you can actually also sometimes cause harm to your clients, because you may, for example, the innocent archetype can be a beautiful archetype. It has this optimism and positivity and help people see positivity and optimism. But in certain circumstances, when a client has to face reality and there are certain things that you have to move through, someone that is very in their innocent archetype and is only so focused on optimism, but they might not want an idealism, it might not want to see reality, can be very unhelpful for a client, and it can be very damaging, because sometimes it can come across as if that therapist or coach is not accepting the client where they're at. They're not they're not, how could you say, accepting and being able to fully be with that client. And if we think about the person-centered approach, which is often used in counselling, things like that, when you are, making your coaching or therapy around the client, if you do not give that client compassion and beingness that they need, and you're trying to pretend everything's okay and pretend that everything will be okay if they're positive about something where maybe they're suffering from grief, or having to face something which requires a certain amount of difficult situations, you're going to project a lot of that child, that naive child, that not grown up kind of aspect onto them. And these are all things that can be really important. And that's why, when you're a coach or healer therapist, it is so important that you do as much inner work on yourself as much as the training and CPD that you do. It can be very easy as a therapist, a healer, or coach to get so caught up that you just do training and courses to add another certificate, to have a title, but you're actually not really mastering things on your own level or doing the deep work for yourself so that you can be more a consciously aware coach, healer, or therapist. So let's look again at different aspects of, the main foundational aspects of where the shadow of these archetypes can show up in relation to denial, or hiding your head in the sand, and these kind of things that can cause problems for us and for our clients and for those going about us. So, for example, we just need to see the last, even if you go back 6, 7, or 8 years, we've seen a lot of things going on in the world. And we look at it on a foundational level, on a structural level. If we look at corporate organisations, that look at banking structures, we look at politics, and we look at where things go, monetary, whatever. No matter if we like it or not, these are all things that are good. You could look at as grown-up things that happen in the world that actually can drip down and impact us all. And if you look at, for example, social issues and political issues, we might not like it, but actually they influence so many areas of our life. They can influence our levels of freedom. They can influence our levels even of how we're able to run a business. Because, for example, for decades, red tape is getting, bigger and wider and deeper and whatever. And it means that lots of red tape can really impact the small business owner and the big business owner. It can influence all sorts of things. And, governments and powers to be can bring in all sorts of things that can really impact people's businesses. And we see this all the time where this law comes in, or this type of tax, or digital tax, this happens. We've got to adhere to this, and you've got to do this, and you've got to sign up for this. You've got to have a GDPR, all this kind of thing. And that all is other people making decisions. And the more that we as individuals and the collective are little children, and we act like, or we hide our head in the sand, or we choose to be the eternal child and think it's not our problem, or, that's not going to impact me, or I'll just pretend it's not going to, it's not going to impact me. The more that we all do these things on an individual level, and we act like children and act as if a lot of these things are not our responsibility or don't impact us, when actually on some level they do. They impact different, people around us if it don't even directly impact us. What we're doing is disconnecting, hiding our head in the sand, and removing ourselves from a level of that's not my responsibility. And I want to let you understand this on a collective level. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that all these things that you have got to start being an active participant in all these things, but we have an individual level and a collective level for decades, and a lot longer than that, handed over our power, our sovereignty, act like children, and give over power to people who don't have our best interests at heart. And as grown-ups, we complain when certain things happen, but we don't do anything about it. And this can happen in all areas of our life. And I see this a lot when people complaining about social media. I can't get my post reach and all that. And, I'm the same. Sometimes I say, I'm not this. But the reality is, if we're getting something for free, You have to got to look at and be realistic about your expectations, and where this kind of attitude of where sometimes, some of these organisations falsely create things so there is an addiction and how could you say, a neediness, a kind of codependency. And lots of platforms, I believe, that's what they've done. They've created a codependent relationship on people basically feeling they need these things to build their business, and they need it for free, or they need it. Now, when you create any codependent relationship that's like the child, you're making the child codependent on something. And if you're that codependent child and you learn not to be self-sufficient or not to grow up, you end up in a lot of problems. And often the eternal child, or even sometimes the innocent child, the innocent child, when they're so in their purity and their innocence, they just want to look at everything in the purity and innocent. But unless they go through their hero's journey and don't, and start to grow up, become a teenager, become an adult, and face all the difficult challenges that the human spirit and the human person faces, that as part of their spiritual, I suppose, initiations through life and spiritual growth. If you don't face many of these challenges, you go through life just being a dependent child, and it can show up in all sorts of ways. And it can show up also in, obviously it's linked to other archetypes as well. And I'll give you some examples. So sometimes you get the little princess archetype where someone is so used to daddy taking care of them, or then they marry someone that they're looking for them to take care of them the night or whatever. And again, they don't take self-responsibility. And if someone else is not paying for it, or someone else is not doing something for them, they're almost like in that damsel distress or even victim archetype, where they have a certain expectation that someone else should do it. Sometimes they expect it for free, or they're just not wanting to pay the value for it. They don't want to do an exchange, or they're a form of manipulation. And again, this can be aspects of that. So when we live our life from the shadow of the child archetypes, we're stuck in a wounding, and obviously can come in different, and there's all different elements to the child archetypes. And obviously the wounded child, the abandoned child, again, that can also create challenges. If you look at, for example, the abandoned child, the orphan child, they can go through their life feeling left out. And because of that wounding, they actually create situations where in some way they come across as the aloof or the outsider, or they actually try and kind of push themselves in and make themselves be part of groups that are not aligned with their values, with their ethics, that they don't really have things in common. It's almost like they're trying to make themselves fit, right? Or they try and create communities and things, and they try and bring everybody in, but again, because they want to make sure that no one feels alone and left out, they can create sometimes communities there's a bit of a mishmash, and it can cause problems, and that's how it can all show up. But if we look at denial at the moment, a lot of people who have been stuck in aspects of their child, their innocent and eternal archetype child, those elements, have found, particularly the last, maybe even more, 4 years or even more, particularly difficult. And why is because that element of not growing up and not having to face the dark. It's like the child, the person that's always afraid of the dark and always has the light on and never faces the dark, never walks in the dark, never, faces the fears. They use all sorts of tactics to pretend that everything's okay, but they don't look at themselves, they don't look at their fears. They can project out to the world, or they make their life so simple and uncomplicated that they don't always seek truth. They don't look at truth. They can be quite lazy, and because they're so simple, idealistic, that it's almost that they want to oversimplify things to such a degree that they don't do the homework. And we're seeing this a lot in the world where media have manipulated things. I remember a situation, and it would be, for nearly 8 years, I think, this situation, and I saw something in the UK, and basically it was a political thing, and I was nearly like everybody else getting dragged in with the media to a certain circus and a projection of what the media was saying about a certain person. It was like almost this media was drumming up and creating this. If you think about a brand is an identity. It's words, colours, psychology. It's all different things that we associate with a brand, right? And what I recognised was this figure, and I'm not saying who the figure was, but this figure was getting projected as a certain, and they were using psychological, in many ways, manipulation, sensationalism, and I think all these kind of words that they do, the things that they do to shift perspective, create certain narratives, use words just to get you hooked and to believe, and take certain, how could you say, captures and cut and edit things and show you bits of something to project a certain narrative. And I'll be honest, for the first few times I saw things, I was not interested in this person. I was not interested in that aspect. And, I put my hands up to a bit lazy when it came to political things, and it was not relevant to my country at that point. But I saw, I kind of believed some of the narrative. But my intuition then, when I saw something, I was like, what, something going on in the background, and it was almost like I didn't really pay full attention, but I almost kind of fully bought into what they were selling and saying about this person. But something in my instinct struck me that something didn't add up about the whole situation, because I felt as if they were pushing such an agenda. It was almost like over over-exaggeration, over an attempt to really hijack and project someone as something. And it's almost like the easiest way to say, when you meet someone who wants to give a really bad opinion of someone and will do everything in their power to project that this person's really bad or they're this, and they want to bring everything in and give this an exaggerated version of someone, right? So my intuition felt there was something not quite right about this situation. Didn't know what it was, and through a variety of situations then I started looking at the situation completely different. And then I looked at different footage, and I was seeing that in the UK, they had completely edited the footage, cut bits, put bits together, and were completely manipulated the narrative. And were selling a story, a version that suited certain agendas. And that is an example where we all can become deceived, easily deceived. And we get hooked into certain narratives. And it's like, when I talk about in the spiritual marketing club side of things that I have, I talk about, when you go to brand a business, you want to be as honest and authentic as possible, because there's most businesses out in the world still, unfortunately, and particularly corporate businesses, sell a brand, an identity that is not always based on truth. It's what they want the world or their audience to believe about the company. And that can often be nothing like the absolute truth. They're selling an agenda. And it's the reason why so many people buy products and services from so many of the most corrupt, dishonest companies in the world, and why so many people are buying products and foods and all sorts of things that are so toxic and harmful, and they keep doing it. It's one of the reasons, because they've bought in the psychology of the brand. That brand knows your weak points, knows what's going to, sometimes it knows your addictions, but also it tries to convince you that it has values, and it creates a narrative, a story it knows your desires and your wants, and it plays on it. But lots of things in the world can play on our desires and addictions or ego or humanness, right? And a child is like that. If you think about a child, and you take a child into a sweetie shop, most children will just want everything. And they're totally in totally wow and this and that. And they have to learn to discern what you need and what, they have to become intuitive. And sometimes they are, but it's just the world has them and they're very desire, oh, I want this, I want that, and I want it now. Right? And that's like the innocent child archetype. It likes to have, it keeps it simple and it doesn't want to go past the superficial. And it sees things as all good and it believes what it's told. The divine child has more of the intuitive spark and the spiritual aspect and the divinity within them. So in its light form, it has slightly different, right? And when you're in your complete divinity, you don't, when you're in your divinity, you own your power. You don't give your power over to other things. But the reality is media, if you think about how addicted people are to phones, to social media, to TV channels, to soaps, to reality TV. And the more that you look at all these things that you're addicted, it can actually tell you so much more about also the woundings of you, what you have, your desires, your archetypes, your seduction, the things that you're easily seduced by. And when we understand that, we see ourselves completely different. But the innocent aspect is that their need to keep everything pure and clear and naive and almost keep that purity is a thing that can stop them completely achieving being that divinity, because they are trying to hide from the truth. They're trying to hide from themselves. And often you find a lot of these type of archetypes don't really do the shadow work, or they do it at a very surface level, or they don't want to go deep. They want to be seen as positive and they hang on just to the positive, or just hang on to the optimism at an unhealthy degree that when their world gets turned upside down or the reality gets turned upside down, it's harder for them because it's like the child that's never learned. And suddenly the whole world is not what they think it was. And because they've never grew up, it's almost that they've got to fast track their way to growing up. Now, there is so many things that is easy in the world today to hide our head in the sand. And of course, we have to face the future with positivity and optimism, and that is the beauty of the innocent archetypes and many of the child archetypes with that purity, the innocent. If you think about the nature child, a child who just loves nature and is very connected to nature and that oneness, and they have the child archetypes have so much to teach us. But the reality is, for adults, you have to grow up. And if we don't grow up, we don't stand in our power. And in many ways, we've got a lot of problems in the world. And we've created those problems with blaming. It's easy to blame certain people in power or certain people we think that have a dark agenda. But part of that is because we have not taken self-responsibility and we act and behave like children. And we are not, going on our own hero's journey, and we're not stepping into our power. So it's really, really important to remember that. And also, when you are supporting clients, it's always really important to remember that, when you're supporting clients, it can be very easy in businesses, and I see this with so many different types of models of therapy, of coaching, healing, whatever, to try and make things so simple. And of course, simple can be very powerful and effective. And the innocent archetype can also teach us about simplicity where we make things overcomplicated. But there is also an element of that where we can bring simplicity and won't bring simplicity just because it suits their ego and because we don't want to face something. And that can be like if you're dealing with a client that doesn't really quite fit into you, what you've been taught, your narrative, or what you would like to project because it's easier for you. So maybe it's easier to do in business and that client doesn't really suit that box and that's really uncomfortable for you. Or that client comes in with certain experiences, values, or whatever that is going to challenge you to some degree. It makes you uncomfortable, so you want to hide your hand in your hand, or you want to try and push your own agenda. And that's like the child. It's like a child who doesn't want to face something they will avoid. They will try and jump to another subject or do something different and distract to anything but face that fear and grow up and do what they need to do. It's like the child and you try to get them to do their chores, but they just want that sweetie, or they want the cake, or they want to do this, they want to do this. But it's about the self-discipline and the discipline of, you know, some of us have learned to self-parent, and the self-parenting thing involves a certain amount of also, you know, self-parent and being kind, obviously, to learn to be kind to yourself, but also about learning when you need to say, right, come on, I need to grow up. I remember a coach said to me quite a few years ago, it was a situation, and a situation that just for me was one of the ones I just hated to deal with in my business. And it froze, I would literally froze, I'd fallen. And that was the response I had to these situations. I was getting very much into my victim and my child archetype. It was situations that I hated to deal with. And I remember her just saying it so casually and so not judgmental, not aggressive or dominant, not trying to overpower me in any way, but in a way, well, you really need to get your big girl pants on, Eileen. And I'm so glad she said it with compassion. She said it from a place of non-judgment, but she said it as fact. And that was the reality. I had to put my big girl pants on because I realised that so many areas of my business, I was being a child. If I was going to run a business, I had to start being an adult and stop letting people walk all over me, take advantage of me and manipulate. But I was allowing it to happen because I was in my victim archetype. And in some ways I was in my child archetype. And I was just letting people off wet just for an easy, so I didn't have to do certain things. There was a bit of the people pleaser and lots of other things in there too. So it's so important to look at the shadow aspect of the child and where you're in denial. You know, where are you hiding? Where are you not looking at things that you really should, right? And that can come in all sorts. It can also come in your level of awakening and looking at things in levels of consciousness, because sometimes our belief system is challenged and we don't want to go there because that means that we have to face that everything we've believed before is not true. But the reality is, if you are going into the healing, the spiritual coaching worlds, you're there to evolve and grow. If you don't evolve and grow, your clients don't evolve and grow, and you limit your clients and you limit yourself. So it's really, really important to remember this. And it's so important to become aware of your own shadows and look and get the help if you need it. You know, there's so many of us out there that can help you with these areas. If this is something you need help with, get in touch. You know, sometimes it can be the smallest thing and the smallest shift and the smallest way, you know, change in how you approach something and look at something that can make the most powerful difference to shift through some of these challenges, right? And it's also about recognizing sometimes our shadow element is there to also protect us in other ways. And it's about recognizing when it's definitely really in its shadow, and when it's actually a strength, and it's part of maintaining certain boundaries. But it's really important to know the difference. And sometimes we don't always see the wood for the trees because we're too close to the situation. So remember, you're the divine child, your eternal child, your innocent child, even your magical child, your nature child. all of these aspects of the child archetypes are so beautiful and powerful and obviously magical, and there can be so many blessings in them all. But in their shadow, they can be so disempowering. They can keep us small. And it's one of the ones that has kept people from stop awakening and not see what's been going on when you know a lot of the world is starting to wake up and see the bigger picture and understand and know what's going on. These archetypes are the archetypes that can often get people into trouble because they don't really know what's going on, and it's because of that stuckness. Okay. Make sure that you check out my free resources if you would like some support to help you become more soul aligned, soul empowered, and really start to own and align with that more powerful you. I have a course that helps you awaken to your inner hero. A free course. It's a coaching and healing session, so I'm going to put the link to that, and I'm going to put a link to some of my other courses. You can also check more out about archetypes, and the podcast, the Wounded Healer to Hero podcast, is also on this channel. And I also have lots of archetypal sessions related to business and marketing over at the Spiritual Marketing Club YouTube channel and spiritualmarketingclub.com website. Have a wonderful day, great week. Bye for now.